there are more casualties than the Somme and Verdun put together. And so my book does change the historiography on warfare on the Eastern Front. But to get back to Brusilov, everybody says, well, he won this great victory, but you know what he did? He fell back into the old pattern of all the other Russian generals. Come July, he goes back to just launching frontal assaults because the railroads aren't close enough and he can't get supplies. And this is where you read about Baranovichy and Kovel, where the guard units go forward. They start with 15,000. By the end of the day, it's 1,000. So Brusilov, toward the end, was not doing well. And his offensive ends actually with the Romanian campaign, which I'll mention later, where his front was extended 250 miles. And he had to send 22 divisions to help the Romanians. Let's get through some of this. I do want to mention, by the way, Gorlice Tarnov. I've been on that battlefield, and if you want to see something interesting to understand, I told you the Russians had 1 million casualties and up to 2 million prisoners of war. There are 216 graveyards around Gorlice. And I won't go into detail, but it's fascinating how they're done. But this is a classic battle. It's May 2nd, the sun is out. There are peasants with their cows between the Russian forces and the German Austro-Hungarian. And the Russian soldiers don't notice that the peasants and their cows have disappeared. And they don't notice the German planes going over, taking the pictures. And in the going back to this Gorlice Tarnov, an entire Russian army is destroyed in 1 week. After the opening barrage of heavy artillery, they were rounding up the prisoners. They were literally insane from the noise of the battling, because at that part of the front, the Russians dug their trenches 3 feet deep, and 1,000 guns opened up on them. It wasn't a good place to be on the Eastern Front when these major battles occurred, but the secret again, on the Western Front, you could not get surprise. At Gorlice Tarnov, you did get surprise. And that's one of the things. And I want to mention something else. It always sounds like, oh, you know, the Russians really did a job here on the Austrians in the Brusilov offensive. What you have to tie in is that the 6 best combat units of the Austro-Hungarian army and their 15 best artillery units had been transferred to the Italian front, and untrained recruits were put in their place. And it is a myth when they say the Russians surprised the Austro-Hungarians. Once again, the few airplanes caught that, and I've read the Tagebuche, or the unit logs. They knew the Russians were moving forward. They didn't have the shells. They were on the Italian front. And the books will tell you that the Austrians lost the Italian campaign because of the Brusilov offensive. And again, I'll tell you something, read my book coming out with Cambridge. The Italian offensive had already been halted. The Brusilov offensive did not make the difference. The Italians had already stopped. I'm sure that is something you remember when you go to your promised land. Here comes some Cossacks. They were brutal. They were absolutely brutal. This is setting up a smoke screen for an attack on the Eastern Front. Look at the guy standing in the airplane. This is one of those Russian planes.
That's an Ilya Muromets.
Yes.
Made by Sikorsky.
Yeah. Then he came to America, became a capitalist, and made helicopters.
Which I used to repair.
He actually developed a bomber before this, but it had trouble. The engines had trouble. Then he developed this one. Now, I talked about the Brusilov offensive already. Now I want to talk about the battle year 1916 itself, because it's the watershed for air warfare. The battles of Verdun and Somme will predicate or prepare what future warfare will be. And it introduced the commencement of aerial warfare with a larger number of aircraft as both sides attempt to seize aerial supremacy on their front. This left the Russians and the Austro-Hungarians out in the cold. Again, they could not produce airplanes. But let's look at the Battle of Verdun briefly, because I tell my students you can't look at one front. They're all connected. Because in 1916, the Entente agreed we're all going to attack at the same time. and we're going to wipe out the Germans and Austro-Hungarians in summer 1916. Falkenhayn knew this. That's why you had the Battle of Verdun. It threw off the Entente plan. But the Battle of Verdun is key because neither France nor Germany ever recover from this battle. They never recover. It was a horrendous battle. I tell my students there's a story. There's a French soldier and a German soldier in the catacombs of Verdun. They don't have arms or legs, but they have a bayonet in their teeth. They're trying to kill each other as they bleed to death. That's the best description of Battle of Verdun you can have. The artillery fired in, and a Frenchman, parts of his body's blown up, and then all the parts of his body until actually there's nothing on the ground but blood because the bodies have been smashed into nothingness. This is the beginning of the war of attrition for World War I. And again, it's going to be like the Civil War. He who survives and can produce the weapons will win the war. Why were the Germans so successful? They did lose surprise. They don't tell you this in the books because it snowed and they couldn't attack right away, so the French were able to get some reserves in. But German fighter planes drove the French from the skies. This was critical because it is how the German artillery could be so effective. When the French sent 23 escadrilles, you study Germany, you have trouble with the French. The French are now able to knock the Germans out of the sky, and the German artillery is now no longer that effective. So again, I want to emphasize how important Verdun is. Now, if you look at the Somme that happens July 1st, everybody knows, well, the British lost 55,000 in one day. It's the most losses in their military history. If you want to understand from an air power viewpoint, the German aircraft were outnumbered 3-1 at the Battle of the Somme because Falkenhayn refused to send air units and reinforcements from the Battle of Verdun. Once he did, then things changed. But the Somme is critical to understand what happens. But again, 1916, you have to look at the years. 1916 is when the Allies go far beyond the Central Powers in industrial production, are able to put many more troops in the field and to make the weaponry for them. Again, I want to go back to the so-called steamroller. France had 39.9 million citizens. They mobilized 12 million soldiers. The Russians had 140 million people, and they mobilized 12.2 million. There was no steamroller while the French were being bled to death. Anyway, the Battle of the Somme was a disaster for German air power. This is where the Germans divide their fighting units. You're going to have a separate recon wing, bomber wing, and fighter wing, which does them very well, and I'm sure you're aware of it, but I'll tell you anyway. To understand warfare on the German front with air power, the Germans knew they were outnumbered, so they never flew into French and British territory. The French were madmen. The French pilots thought it was a sport, so they go rushing over the German lines, and the German people watching would radio back. So many planes are coming, and that's when the Germans took off. And that's why, if you ever heard of Bloody April, that's why that occurred. With the British lost, I don't know how many planes, a lot of them. But the point is the Germans fought a defensive air war from the beginning because they were so outnumbered. So the French and British had to come over, and of course you shoot down the most modern British or French airplane, wow, you can copy it. And I'm sure Jack can tell you a lot of stuff was learned from getting captured airplanes, etc. But so by 1917, the Germans had 36 pursuit squadrons, and they were doing much better. And I'm not going to go into it. You all know about the Germans bombing England and all that. I'll skip that. But what I want to point out is that German photography was getting better and better. They were the best at this thing. It is said that the pictures that German recon pilots took could circle the globe 6 times. And on the Eastern Front, the maps were terrible. So that many of the commanders launching attacks and moving forward had no idea where they were going. It was the recon pilots. And by the way, with the Battle of Gorlice-Tarnow, it starts out where every German general has airplanes.